In the United States, something happened that experts are still arguing about today. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't a hoax, and it wasn't something discovered years later. This incident unfolded in real time. There were witnesses who saw it happen. There was physical evidence left behind, and there were trained professionals called in to investigate. At first, it seemed explainable. But then the details didn't line up. Measurements contradicted expectations. Accounts matched in ways they shouldn't have. And official explanations raised more questions than they answered. Some experts blamed natural causes, others suspected human involvement. A few suggested something far more unusual. But no matter which theory was tested, something didn't fit. And the deeper investigators looked, the harder it became to explain what really happened, because if the evidence is accurate, then this wasn't supposed to be possible. So, what exactly occurred? And why, after all this time, does no explanation fully make sense? What made this incident so unsettling wasn't just what happened. It was how quickly it stopped making sense. At first, investigators believed it would be routine, unusual, maybe, but explainable, but almost immediately, contradictions began to surface. Some evidence pointed in one direction, while other findings suggested the complete opposite. Experts who normally agreed on the basics couldn't reach the same conclusions. Each new analysis seemed to cancel out the last, and that wasn't the strangest part, because instead of becoming clearer with time, the incident became more confusing. The more data was collected, the less certain anyone felt. That's when investigators noticed something disturbing. Key details remained consistent no matter who examined them. Different teams, different methods, same unexplained results. That consistency made it harder to dismiss the incident as error or coincidence. As word spread, public attention grew. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets began asking questions. Speculation started quietly, then escalated into concern. Some people feared it was dangerous. Others worried it was being covered up, and a few began asking whether it could happen again. Government agencies were soon involved, not to alarm the public, but to understand the situation, and even they struggled to provide clear answers. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. The most unsettling part was this: every explanation seemed reasonable until one detail ruined it, one small contradiction that refused to disappear, and that single detail ensured this incident would not fade away quietly. Because once experts admit they don't fully understand something, the mystery only grows. It happened on what appeared to be an ordinary day. The date itself didn't stand out. It wasn't a holiday. There were no major events scheduled. The location was familiar, somewhere in the United States where life usually moved at a predictable pace. People were going about their routines. Commuters were on the road. Businesses were open. Classrooms were filled. Nothing suggested the day would be remembered for anything unusual. Until suddenly. It was. At first, the disruption was subtle. Some noticed a strange change in their surroundings. Others heard something that didn't belong. A few people stopped what they were doing, unsure of what they were experiencing. Then the moment passed, and for a brief second, everything felt normal again. But that didn't last. Witnesses began reacting almost all at once. People stepped outside. Cars slowed down. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones came out. Calls were made. And confusion spread faster than any explanation could keep up. Within minutes, emergency lines began receiving reports. Not just one or two, but many. Callers struggled to describe what they had seen or heard. Some sounded calm but uncertain. Others were shaken. Operators asked the same questions again and again. What exactly did you observe? Are you in danger? Can you describe it? And in many cases, the answers didn't match anything in their system. That's when the tone changed. Local authorities were alerted. First responders were dispatched. Newsrooms began noticing the sudden spike in activity. Reporters interrupted regular programming with brief updates, careful not to speculate, but unable to ignore what was happening. Social media filled the gaps faster than official statements could. Videos appeared short, shaky, unclear. Posts contradicted one another. Rumors spread. Some claimed it was harmless. Others believed it was serious, but no one knew for sure. As responders arrived, the situation became harder to define. There was no obvious damage. No clear cause. No simple explanation, and that uncertain time made people uneasy. Then just as quickly as it began, everything stopped. The disturbance ended. The reports slowed. The area grew quiet again, but by then it was too late. The incident had already been recorded, witnessed, reported, and once officials began reviewing what had happened, they realized this was not something they could easily explain. When investigators began examining the scene, they expected the evidence to point in a clear direction. Instead, it did the opposite. What they found didn't just raise questions, it challenged basic expectations. Initial measurements were taken carefully. Instruments were calibrated, conditions were double-checked. And yet, the results came back wrong. Not slightly off, not within an acceptable margin of error, completely inconsistent with what should have been possible. This should have been impossible, one analyst later admitted. Certain readings suggested forces or conditions that shouldn't have been present at all. According to experts, this result shouldn't exist. At least not under the circumstances recorded that day. Investigators assumed the problem had to be equipment failure. So they tested the equipment again. And again, the same readings appeared every time. Different devices. Different operators. Same outcome. That's when concern turned into confusion. Physical traces were documented, marks, changes. Anomalies that didn't match any known pattern. Some signs suggested intense activity. Others implied almost no disturbance at all. Those two things should not coexist, yet there they were, side by side. One official described it as evidence that contradicts itself. Environmental data made things even stranger. Conditions before, during, and after the incident were nearly identical. No storms. No seismic activity. No mechanical failures reported nearby. Nothing that could easily explain the results. A scientist reviewing the data reportedly said, "If this is accurate, then we're missing something fundamental." That statement alone carried weight, because it wasn't said lightly. Experts rarely admit gaps in understanding, especially publicly, yet as more specialists reviewed the findings, the same conclusion emerged. The evidence was real. The data was consistent, but the explanation was missing. Analysts attempted to recreate the conditions. Simulations were run. Models were adjusted. Each attempt failed. Some models explained one piece of evidence but contradicted another. Others fit the data but required assumptions that didn't exist in reality. According to one researcher, you can make the math work, but only by breaking the rules, and breaking the rules of science isn't an explanation. It's a warning sign. As reports circulated internally, language became more cautious. Words like unknown, anomalous, and unidentified appeared more frequently, not because investigators wanted mystery, but because no standard explanation survived scrutiny. One official summary noted that while individual data points could be rationalized, taken together, they formed a picture that didn't make sense. And that was the most troubling part, because when evidence refuses to align, it suggests something happened that existing knowledge can't fully explain, and that realization pushed this incident beyond routine investigation into something far more unsettling. By the time investigators began speaking with witnesses, the story had already grown complicated. People from different neighborhoods described the same event, but with variations that didn't align. Some remembered seeing strange movements in the sky. Others claimed to hear noises that seemed impossible to locate. A few described changes in the environment, lights, shadows, objects that no one else noticed. The timelines were confusing. One witness insisted it happened just before noon. Another swore it occurred 20 minutes later. Yet a third placed it closer to the afternoon. And yet, amid the discrepancies, certain details were consistent. Several witnesses independently mentioned the same unusual sound, low, pulsing, and vibrating. Multiple people reported seeing a brief, unexplained flash. Some even described the same pattern of shadows shifting across the street. Those similarities gave investigators hope. Perhaps these accounts could be pieced together into a coherent picture, but the differences raised more questions than they answered. How could people see the same flash but at different times? How could the sounds match if they were supposedly moving through the air in a predictable way? Why did some witnesses feel a sudden drop in temperature, while others experienced nothing? At all, or conflicting stories created a puzzle that was impossible to solve with certainty. Even professional investigators, trained to reconcile accounts, struggled to make sense of it. And then, Something extraordinary happened. One witness said something that changed everything. It wasn't just a detail that contradicted others. It wasn't an exaggeration or a misremembered fact. It was a statement that suggested the entire understanding of the event might be wrong. Investigators paused. They re-interviewed the witness. They double-checked every previous account. And yet the statement held. Whatever happened that day, this witness's account implied it wasn't what anyone thought it was. Whatever happened that day, this witness's account implied it wasn't what anyone thought it was. And that single revelation sent ripples through the investigation, casting doubt on every explanation that had been considered up to that point. After days of investigation, authorities released their official statement. According to the report, what happened that day was the result of natural phenomena, rare but not unprecedented. They claimed that unusual atmospheric conditions, combined with temporary equipment anomalies, explained most of the observed effects. The flashes, the sounds, the strange readings, they argued, were all predictable once these factors were accounted for. At first glance, it sounded reasonable. It offered closure. It reassured the public. It fit neatly into a familiar framework, but for experts who had spent weeks analyzing the data, questions immediately surfaced. Some pointed out inconsistencies in the report's timeline. Others noted that certain measurements could not have occurred under the conditions described, and a few details, minor yet critical, were omitted entirely. These gaps weren't dramatic, but they were enough to raise doubt. The public reaction was mixed. Many accepted the explanation. They returned to their daily routines, convinced that authorities had provided clarity. Others were skeptical. Discussions spread quickly on social media, with users dissecting the official statement line by line. Amateur analysts highlighted anomalies that investigators hadn't addressed. And soon, a growing chorus of voices questioned whether the explanation was complete. News outlets followed the controversy closely. Some reported the story cautiously, repeating the official narrative while acknowledging the lingering questions. Others explored the inconsistencies more openly, interviewing experts who said, without speculation, that certain details didn't add up. And even as the explanation circulated, the investigation's credibility remained intact. No one suggested foul play. No one accused authorities of deception. Instead, the focus shifted naturally to a simpler truth. The official explanation solved part of the mystery, but it didn't explain everything. And when an official report leaves questions unanswered, curiosity doesn't fade, it intensifies, because the more people examine what happened, the more gaps they notice, and in those gaps, the real mystery lives. With the official explanation leaving questions unanswered, experts began proposing alternative theories. The first theory focused on natural phenomena. Some suggested that rare atmospheric conditions created illusions of movement, light, and sound. Others proposed unusual electromagnetic interference that could have affected instruments and perception simultaneously. This theory explains a lot. It accounts for the flashes. It accounts for the anomalous readings. It even explains why multiple witnesses reported similar effects, but not this one detail. The timing of certain measurements didn't align with natural patterns. No known atmospheric or magnetic event could create those exact results in sequence. The second theory suggested human error. Some analysts proposed that witnesses and responders unintentionally misinterpreted what they observed. Equipment may have been miscalibrated, or operators could have recorded data incorrectly. This theory explains why some of the readings seemed impossible at first glance. It accounts for minor inconsistencies in witness accounts, but again, it fails to fully explain everything. Several independent devices, operated by professionals, reported the same anomalies simultaneously, and trained observers consistently describe events that human error alone cannot reproduce. The third theory involved rare environmental conditions. Experts speculated that a combination of temperature shifts, local air currents, and unique geographic features could have produced unexpected physical effects. Perhaps heat differentials bent light, or unusual wind patterns amplified certain sounds. This theory explains unusual sensory experiences and partially addresses why multiple witnesses reported similar phenomena, yet it falls short. Some physical evidence contradicts what these conditions should have produced. Some measurements indicate forces or effects that are simply not possible under known environmental rules. Finally, a fourth theory considered unknown variables. Some researchers suggested that there may have been factors we haven't yet identified, subtle forces or phenomena that are rare, Unpredictable or poorly understood, this theory doesn't attempt to force an explanation. It leaves room for mystery. And yet, it highlights a troubling reality. Even the best scientific models struggle to account for every piece of evidence taken together. The theories provide perspective, but not closure. Each one comes close to an answer, explaining certain details, yet leaving others unresolved. Experts themselves acknowledge the uncertainty. Some call it a puzzle with missing pieces. Others describe it as a phenomenon that challenges conventional understanding, and that's why the investigation remains compelling, because no matter how carefully it is analyzed, a small but crucial piece always resists explanation, a single detail that keeps the mystery alive and ensures that experts, despite their best efforts, remain baffled. Among all the evidence collected, one detail stood out above the rest. It was subtle, almost easy to overlook. Yet when investigators focused on it, everything else seemed to fall into a shadow. Pause to seconds of silence. It was a pattern, but unlike anything they had seen before. Not random, yet not predictable. It defied logic. Experts couldn't reconcile it with any known phenomenon. It didn't match natural laws, environmental patterns, or human behavior, and it appeared across multiple measurements, witnesses, and recordings. Pause to 1.5 seconds. This was the detail that refused to be explained. And as analysts revisited the reports, they realized something chilling. It connected to clues they had already considered: the strange readings, the contradictory witness accounts, the physical anomalies, all pointed back to this single, confounding pattern. It was almost as if the entire incident had been orchestrated around it, except no one could explain how or why. Pause to 3 seconds of silence. Scientists ran simulations, replayed witness statements, and even recalibrated instruments. Nothing reproduced it. Nothing could account for its existence. One official quietly admitted, "If this is accurate, then we are observing something that shouldn't exist." And yet, it did exist. Every piece of evidence verified it. Every account confirmed it, but no explanation survived scrutiny. Pause to seconds of silence. The more investigators focused on this detail, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a strange anomaly. It wasn't an odd coincidence. It was the heart of the mystery, and until someone or something can explain this detail, the incident remains unsolved. It challenges everything that experts thought they knew. It undermines every theory that seemed plausible, and it ensures that the questions will continue to outnumber the answers. Pause to 2.5 seconds of silence. This single, subtle, and almost hidden detail transforms the incident from strange to truly disturbing, because if experts cannot explain this, then what else about that day might never make sense? As investigators dug deeper, they noticed something unsettling. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across the United States, there were reports of similar events, strange, unexplained occurrences that shared key details with the original incident. In a small town hundreds of miles away, residents described fleeting lights in the sky, strange sounds that seemed to come from nowhere, and physical measurements that contradicted basic physics. Weeks later, another incident occurred in a different state. Witnesses reported the same low-frequency hum, inexplicable flashes, and sudden environmental changes. Again, experts arrived and found anomalies that refused to be explained. A third case in yet another region involved unusual patterns appearing in local data readings. Like the first, instruments recorded results that shouldn't have been possible. And, once more, the official explanations accounted for only part of the story. Even more remarkably, in each case, the anomalies echoed elements from the original event. Some details matched almost exactly: the timing, the sensory effects, even subtle patterns in the measurements. Other details varied slightly, but enough to suggest a common underlying phenomenon. At this point, some experts stopped calling it a coincidence. They began to see a pattern, a series of anomalies that couldn't be ignored. Independently occurring events that shared striking similarities, defying standard explanation. Researchers began comparing data side by side. Graphs, readings, witness statements all aligned in ways that were difficult to dismiss. And as the pattern became clearer, the mystery grew. It wasn't just one event that left experts baffled. It was a series of events, scattered across the country, all pointing toward the same unanswered questions, and that realization changed the way the investigation was approached, because when a single mystery becomes multiple mysteries, patterns emerge that demand attention, patterns that hint at something bigger, something still unseen, and something that science, experts, and ordinary people alike have yet to fully understand. Years have passed since the original incident, and yet it is still referenced in scientific journals, investigative reports, and public discussions, not because it caused destruction, not because it directly changed policy, but because it reminds us of a simple, unsettling truth: we don't always understand the world around us. Even with modern technology, advanced instruments, and experienced professionals, there are phenomena that challenge our knowledge. It teaches us to remain curious, to question assumptions, to pay attention to details that might otherwise seem insignificant, and perhaps most importantly, it shows that evidence can exist without explanation. Experts continue to reference this incident not as a failure but as a reminder that some events defy simple categorization, that some mysteries endure. Even when studied meticulously, the incident remains unsolved because the answers are incomplete. Every theory explains part of the story but never the whole, and that gap, that space of uncertainty, is what keeps people studying, debating, and revisiting the events over and over. It also matters because it continues to inspire questions about perception, questions about the limits of science, questions about the patterns we see, and the patterns we might be missing, and perhaps most hauntingly, even today, we are left with the same uncertainty that investigators faced all those years ago. The incident still defies explanation, and that, in itself, is its lasting significance, because mysteries like this aren't meant to be solved quickly. They're meant to make us think, to keep us searching, to remind us that sometimes the unknown is just as important as the known. With all the evidence available, no explanation fully fits. Every theory, every analysis, every expert opinion leaves gaps. The patterns persist, the anomalies remain, and the strangest detail, the one that defies all logic, still cannot be explained. So what really happened that day? Was it a rare natural phenomenon, a misinterpretation of events, something beyond our understanding entirely? Even after decades of study, the questions outweigh the answers, and perhaps the most unsettling part is this: it could happen again, somewhere in another town, under similar conditions, and we might not be ready to understand it when it does. What would you make of it if you were there? If you saw the evidence, heard the sounds, and felt the same inexplicable patterns, what explanation would make sense to you? The mystery remains unsolved. The questions remain open. And for now, that's the story.